Right, and welcome back. Alright, I'm just going to create another emitter over here. Just quick default. There we go. And I'm going to press play. Now I'm going to talk about the speed. Quickly turn this to a directional. There we go. So I've got particles spitting out in a particular direction. Let me just reduce this down so we can see it's a bit clearer. There we go. So we go down to our speed options. There we go. You'll see if I plug in a 2 over here, the speed will double. If I plug in a 1, they decrease again. Now this randomized speed is a little bit weird. If I plug in a 1, you'll see that yes, they are in fact having randomized speed. But the way this is calculated is half of the amount that you plug in here is added, and the other half is subtracted. So for instance, if I have a speed of 1 with a random speed of 1, the maximum particle speed will be 1.5 and the minimum particle speed will be 0.5. So if I plug in a 2 here, the maximum particle speed will be 2, whereas the minimum particle speed will be 0. You can see a few particles over here basically just standing still. However, if we take this and push it even further to a 4, you'll see a few of them going in the opposite direction, meaning the maximum speed here is 3 and the minimum speed will be -1, sorry. Yeah, so that's keep that in mind when you're pushing with your randomized speed. If you have this too high, you might end up with unintended issues such as that. Right, so let's see the next bit. Let me go to my outliner. There we go. The next bit over here is grayed out, tangent speed and normal speed. The reason why they're grayed out is because that is dependent on a surface emitter. So I'm going to do that quickly. I'm going to create a quick plane. The plane selected, I'm going to go to Control A, go down to my polyplane, and then just select my subdivisions and just reduce this a smidge. There we go. With the plane selected, I'm going to do my particle systems, and I'm going to create a emit from object. Go into the options. I'm just going to reset this to make sure it's default, and hit apply. Now, the particles will be emitting from this surface, but it's going to be emitting in a bit of an odd way. Oh, firstly, don't forget that your emitter, once created as attached to a surface, will be parented to that surface. So if you're looking for it, that's where it's hiding. Now, by default, it will then create a omni emitter. I don't want omni, I want to have surface. So let me just plug in surface over there. Now if I hit play, you'll see several particles being emitted away from that surface. Actually, let me just scale the surface up a little bit, just so it's a little easier to see. There you go. Now let me rewind that. Okay, so these guys are going up in a particular direction. Now, if we look at the emitter options, you'll see that these two options are now ungrayed. Tangent speed basically governs the angle of the particles. Think of it sort of as like a spread option, but for surfaces. Now, normal speed governs its speed, but these two options are mostly used in things such as curve emitters. We'll get to that in just a second. Let me just return this to a 1 and go back to my normal speed, tangent speed, there we go. So you'll see it's spreading out. So why is the spread out useful? Well, if we grab these vertices over here and just simply drag them up, creating this angle, you'll see that these particles will now emit in the direction that the surface is pointing, which is fantastic. The only issue is sometimes you'll end up with this very obvious sort of gap where the particles are just not emitting. That's where this tangent speed is a good thing to have. So you can just increase it a little bit, and you can sort of like cover up that hole. Now, the reason why this guy gave us omni as a default is because if you have an emitter attached to a surface, you can actually emit from the individual vertices. Now this is incredibly useful. I mean, let's say for instance you have a character that you want to make it out of smoke or something, I don't know. That's great, because now wherever the geometry is, that's where you're going to be emitting from. This also works as you'd imagine, with directional emitters. So let's just rewind that, and you can see now they're all emitting from a very particular direction, which is fantastic. Now, let me quickly deal with curves. So I'm just going to grab all this. I'm just going to delete that. I'm going to create a quick curve over here. So create curve tool. Okay. Now, with the curve tool selected, I'm going to go to my create emit from objects. There we go. And I'm going to make sure that this is turned to curve. Now if I hit play, you'll see that these particles are quite happily spawning from that curve. If we go down to our tangent speed and tangent or normal direction, you'll see that if I turn normal direction off, all of these all of these particles will be spawning heading into a very particular direction. But by increasing the normal speed, I'm effectively widening it. It's basically a spread, but for curves. Let me just turn that off quickly. Now, tangent speed, this one's a bit more interesting. This one allows you to actually emit the particles in the direction of the curve. They're not sticking to the curve, but they're looking at the curve at the point of birth, and they're actually moving in that direction, which is really useful, which is great. So I'm just going to turn this to turn the tangent speed off. As you'd imagine, the CVs of this curve will be also used as an emitter, much like a surface. So if I go up here to my emitter options and change this bad boy to a omni, you'll see that they are emitting from the CVs. Please note, as I said, they're emitting from the CVs, not the curve, right? So sometimes you get this sort of thing, which is not exactly what you'd want. You may want to have other options if you want to emit from very specific points on the curve, because this is not necessarily going to do it for you, but it is an option if you want to, and as you'd expect, the directional will work just fine. There you go. Right, I think we're running a little bit out of time for this particular chapter. I'm going to cover volumes and volume emitter in the next chapter. Right, in this chapter, what we've learned was the emitting from surfaces and curves, and how one could potentially use things such as the vertices or CVs of those surfaces and curves to become very specific emitters. Right, I shall see you guys in the next chapter.